Does your tank need its own introduction as well?
No, no, anyway. All right, folks, hello. Special show tonight, of course. It always is with Clint Smith around. Clint Smith, Gray Panthers. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Adella Fernandez, she'll be here running things, and Richard Dominguez. Good to see you again here, sir. We ain't had you on the show in quite some time.
I know. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm going to sit off here to the side, but if y'all get me too riled up, I'm going to come back on here and say something, okay?
Okay.
Good.
Hopefully we do.
Can't take it, so you're going to stay on the side.
Yeah, my oxygen tank says I need to sit down over there for a little while. But anyway, I know it's going to be interesting and full of info here. And we have our announcements coming up later on, about the last 2 minutes of the show. All right, carry on, folks.
Okay, well, I guess that sends it off to me. Again, we have Clint Smith with us, who has by far been one of our most informative guests on the show, if you've been following our show. This man is a guru of local, state, and nationwide politics, but we kind of want to refocus this particular episode on corruptive practices, and with his plethora of knowledge, I would like to send it off to Mr. Smith with the idea. All of our viewers right now, with the information given to us from Mr. Smith, keep in mind next Thursday is the last Austin City Council meeting. So if you have anything you want to bring to the City Council, next Thursday is the Thursday to do it. So with that, I will hand it off to Mr. Smith, and we'll take it from there.
Well, first off, with an introduction like that, I'm ready to stop right now because I'm not sure we can live up to that.
You will.
Thank you
Clint
very
Smith.
much. I appreciate being back and having an opportunity to meet and to talk with the panel here and to try to cover a few points that are very much of concern to us. That is, to the National Gray Panthers, to the citizens of the community here, groups that we work with, and so forth. And especially in connection with the real concerns so many people have now in the local area with affordability, the economic situation. As many people know, not too long ago, a report came out that reflected, at least characterized this area as probably the most economically segregated community in the nation.
South Austin.
Yes.
Of Austin, yes.
Austin,
And really,
okay.
yes, of Austin. And we see poverty moving to the suburbs in many cases. And while the economy seems to be booming at the present time, things are looking good, not everybody is sharing in that. So among the many concerns that Gray Panthers and other organizations have had and in working in the community was really moving into the 10-1 changeover, the big change that came 2 years ago with the restructuring of the city council.
10 council members,
10-1
one mayor.
Right, thanks for that. And many people believe that, at least assume that we might see some real progress, and I think we have. We've seen an increase, for example, in the budgeting for health and human services in the last year. And we hope that that will continue. We always keep in mind, too, and make the point that 70% or 69% of the city's budget really goes into public safety, fire, EMS, and
First responders.
yes, fire, police, and EMS. So that we want to make sure that we have at least a reasonable kind of balance, and we're trying to keep people informed about what we can do and how we can work together to make sure that the public's needs are being met. So we're at the point now about where we were a year ago when we talked, I guess, twice on this program. And we were looking at that time at issues that had come out of the period before the 10-1 changeover and a number of things that needed to be done. So we felt, well, the 10-1 changeover is fine, but let's also be sure that we are looking at some unfinished business. And to a large extent, that involved systemic problems, I guess I'd say, the kinds of things that were not necessarily the fault of people in the system, but the kinds of issues or problems that the system itself created. So 10-1 was to go along. It wasn't going to solve everything, but at least it was to provide much more responsiveness on the part of elected officials to the public, more transparency, which is an overworked word that's been used.
Exactly.
And so we were hopeful that we'd see much more progress by this time, a year later. I have to say, though, however, that as the old saying goes, sometimes the more things change, the more they seem to stay the same, remain the same. And by that I mean, you mentioned again, this last meeting of the council comes up this week. We still have a number of issues that are hanging fire. One is very much concerned to people, and that is the evaluation of city management, and particularly the city manager's performance.
Which is an enormous valuation. City manager, City of Austin manager. That should be a very utmost sort of evaluation, I would think, because this is the City of Austin.
Well, that's quite true. Part of the problem, or at least a concern of ours, though, is that we had hoped, again, going back to this word, transparency, we had hoped that we'd have an open kind of review of that, a public review. But when that came before council, it was voted down. They voted against it. The majority did. And so we wound up with a, I won't say it's secret, but it certainly has not been, at least it hasn't been done yet. We don't know when it will be completed, and the can keeps being kicked down the road. So a big issue here is to what extent can we rely on the new budget figures coming out?
And how transparent
And
are they
when we
actually
haven't-
are?
That's right, when we haven't had the sort of transparency promised.
Mm-hmm.
The other, and I like to put it this way, who would go into a new business or a new enterprise without checking the books first?
Exactly.
And so while we went through the changes under 10-1, we never really had what's called a scrubbing of the books. Meanwhile, we have all kinds of issues hanging fire. There's a good example, and these have been cataloged in our Gray Panther. They're online, and I can provide these a little later as we go. But any number, we have 7 pages, for example, of questions and unresolved financial issues listed in one of our websites, the Gray Panthers website. You can Google it. Affordability starts with accountability. And so far, we've been unable to get answers to those questions.
That's unfortunate because that's a great mantra.
Well, the question is, if we're $1 billion or $2 billion in debt, there may be some similar small figures. To what extent should we be looking, or should we not be looking, or the public certainly, looking at where we stand now? And so we have those figures, but we've not been able to get answers. So I'm not here to make charges or to make accusations. It's really a matter of asking questions. If we're going to have a transparent system, then where is the clarity? Where is the information that we were promised?
For sure.
If people don't have anything to hide, our elected officials, why aren't we given the information? So with that sort of background, I just want to make the point, I think that this is an assessment, we feel, an opportunity for an assessment before the last meeting of the City Council. And since the assessment of the city manager has not been made or completed yet, that's a question that's still hanging fire. So bottom line, we're asking, as we did a year ago, for the support of the community and asking, it's not a demand, but it is a request that we have an outside independent evaluation. And it may be that that'll have to be made by the federal government. We did have the FBI, the Department of Justice, in a few years ago to look at housing, and that may have to happen again. So again, it's not a threat, it's not a promise, but it is a consideration. And if the public can't get answers, then we need to go to a level at which we can reasonably expect to get a response.
Especially, like you said, because transparency and accountability were like in all of the 10-1 campaigns. It didn't matter if you were in District 3 or District 6. Everybody was saying it. With
Right.
all 58 candidates used it at least once. So it's unfortunate that we're having this issue yet again a year later. And so I completely agree with you on the lack of transparency. And it is a very blatant, bold-faced lie to tell either first-time or friendly, naive voters that you're giving them false promises. Those are falsehoods. If you're not political gurus, if you don't know the basics of political lingo, how do you know what the hell 20% exemption homestead is?
Right.
Unless you break that down into a budget of Pampers, rent, card note, they're not going to understand that. So the transparency and the accountability went wayside when it came to political lingo.
And I think what happened was with 10-1, we were promised one thing and then it changed. And
It morphed, yeah.
how it changed was that each individual representative from the district would represent that district. They wouldn't be representing the city at large. However, what they did after the fact was the mayor made committees. And in these, because he didn't want to spend hours and hours and hours on the dais. So when he made these committees, he put a chairman in charge of certain aspects, so health and human services or whatever. By default, that made that city council member an at-large representative. So they were no longer just looking at their district anymore. They now had to look at their district, and they had to do their committee work. And their committee work had to be all of the city of Austin. And that's how they diluted the power of 10-1. And that was unfortunate. So that is where some of the transparency is getting kind of get caught up. Now they have to worry about their committee chairmanship, and it's getting kind of convoluted. And so I just wanted to make that
Everybody
point.
wants to be a chief. Nobody wants to be an Indian, so to say. And these and technically, if you're not familiar with 10-1, there's 10 different districts. East Austin is very different than West Austin. North Austin is very different than South Austin. And in each of these 10 districts, every one of these council members really are the, for lack of a better term, president, and supposed to be the advocate for their designated areas. However, when you have, whether you want the different aspects from District 6 where they're facing lack of water, as opposed to District 3 where they have great agriculture. So it's a completely different, very diverse council with one mayor. So like I said, more chiefs, not enough people listening, or at least not until it's committee, as you said. And then there's advocates like yourself, like myself, like yourself, that have to pick up the slack, because from the three of us up here, I don't think with the oomph that the three of us have, it's gonna die. So whether you attend city council or not, whether you're there in person, you can view it via on the internet. And this is the part where I'm so glad that people like you exist, because people like you give people like me reason to get out and get my voice heard. Whether my neighbor votes or not, I want to make sure that I'm helping the Clint Smiths of the world. Because you guys, like you said, the Gray Panthers have already opened up all these doors. And before we walked in here, your biggest thing that you needed was support. And that is a very extremely, just like transparency, it's used over and over and over to where it's lost its meaning. It's lost its meaning. For things like this, and I'm going to allow Mr. Smith to elaborate further, because this guy blew my mind last time around, but I wanted to make it very clear that it's been diluted into thinking that we can trust our city councilmen, even though they may have the utmost and best intentions. When you're working with a conservative versus a liberal, and it doesn't matter which way you vote, one way or another, but when you have to work together cohesively and you have vastly different ideas, where does the votes for all of the city come in together and work as a team, so to say?
Are you familiar with the Killeen City Council and the city manager situation that happened about 5 years ago?
Not particularly, or at least I don't recall. What was it?
The city manager at that time there was accusations that there was misappropriations, misconduct,
I remember that,
and
yeah.
they got to pay out a check of over $300,000. The
Right.
guy went and got the check the next day, cashed the check, and like left town.
Right.
And the citizens were like, "Whoa, wait a minute! Why does he get this large check? It looks like this is a buy-off, and it looks like he's hiding secrets."
Right.
And so this one man, his name was Jonathan Okray, got on the back of his pickup, and he started a recall election. He had no political experience. He was a retired enlisted, and he got enough signatures to get every single member of the council recalled.
Yay for him. Isn't that a
And that's
triumph?
just like one person just standing up to this big good old boy system that has always been in place.
Right.
And he has been in office now for, I guess this is his third term. And so there is ways, that's just one example of one city dealing with a rogue city manager.
Right.
I don't think that that's quite the situation we have currently, but you know, if we don't feel that our representatives are representing us, I mean, who does the blame fall on? Does it blame fall on the city manager, or the city council?
Or the citizens that
Right.
didn't vote.
What are your thoughts?
Well, these are real good points, Richard and Adella. And I think, I remember now about the Colleen situation, and it makes this point, I think, where it underscores it, that you don't always need an army. Quite often, one individual who's dedicated or a small group can bring
That's a
about
very
a lot
good
of
point.
change. The other thing I think we have to remember is quite often in these big bureaucracies, I worked for the federal government for a while myself, and we look at what you described about, or I guess you described here about the dilution and the duplication, fragmentation, and overlapping functions can be as confusing as anything that we had before, when we had a city council that was basically passed the buck around. It was round robin, if you had a problem. But I think two things to keep in mind. Number one is that the city charter now remains the same here in Austin. It has not been changed at this point. So it does provide for a strong city manager and a so-called weak mayor.
Right.
And that, so when it comes to accountability, we have to keep that in mind. But one of the things that 10-1 has helped us do now, we have a record of a year now of performance and looking at what has happened and where the question of accountability, where that lies and what we need to do. Now, this is where, Adella, the public does kick in. This is the issue. We have 5 people up for re-election this time around. People elected under the
5 of
10-1.
the 10.
5 of the 10 up for re-election. Now is the time to ask these kinds of questions. Bottom line, where is the accountability report that, let's say, Gray Panthers and North Austin Coalition asked for 18 months ago? We asked for in writing, and I wrote to every member of the council and the mayor. I did get a response from, or at least acknowledgement from the mayor's office and from Don Zimmerman. I don't recall, Ori Houston did also provide a response too.
But
On the other
only
hand-
those.
But only
out of
those.
all your letters written.
But the point is, nothing more has happened since then. I got your note, thank you, we'll get back to you, nothing more at this
Yeah.
point. So what I'm saying is now is the time for the public to question, particularly when it comes to these budget issues, where is our money going? Where is it being spent? Why aren't you telling us? Why is it that we can't get an open public evaluation of the city manager who's been in the job now for 8 years? And particularly when we've had all these issues and questions, what fundamentally led up to the 10-1 changes taking place. That's where the public comes in. So I feel what we can do here, we can be instrumental as a small group. Again, it doesn't take an army, but we can raise questions. And I think the one thing that I have reminded myself of quite often, at least from time to time, in dealing with these bureaucracies can get very somnolent. They can get very rest on their laurels rather. But one of the things we have to keep in mind, sometimes the only thing that may exceed their arrogance is their ignorance and the fact that they don't realize that people do get to the point where we can make a difference. But this is where the accountability comes. So we have the accountability on the part of the elected and appointed officials, but we now also have the accountability on the part of the people. It's up to us now. And the budget is the best time. Again, as I think we said in one of our sessions before, if you are not in the budget, you are out. And now is the time to raise questions about accountability, about where the money is being spent, what's being proposed.
Those are bold statements to make. That is a very bold, inspiring
Exactly.
statement to make for an individual to get involved. Just as Mr. Dominguez brought up Colleen, like you said, it doesn't take, it can only take just one person to start a revolution of sorts.
Right. Now, this, I have to admit, this is mainly cheerleading up to this point. And what we're saying is we have an opportunity now for the public to really get involved. And what we're trying to do, and again, I can provide these websites whenever it's appropriate, but we would like people to go to these websites, take a look. One is the AustinAccountabilityProject.com, www.AustinAccountabilityProject.com.
AustinAccountabilityProject.com.
.com. And that outlines numerous examples, specific documented examples of what happened prior to 10-1, including involvement, appeals to the district attorney's office, to other levels of oversight and so forth. In many cases, these issues were covered by the local press. Now, some were resolved to some extent, many others are still hanging fire. So you take a look at that. The other is to take a look again at the North Austin Love North Austin, http://www.lovenorthaustin.com blog.
LoveNorthAustin.com blog.
Slash.
Okay.
I got it written right.
Okay, gotcha.
Blog. Slash Gray Panthers, Gray-Panthers dash affordability starts with accountability. And the spelling of accountability is ACCOUNTABLITY. Again, we could put this up on the screen at some point, maybe in the future, or make it available. But this will provide in that last one now, we have 7 pages, again, of examples. And these are very specific issues and instances in which money has been spent, for example, in enterprise funds at the state and local levels, including money that was expended to help bring the F1 track in and so forth. So it's very interesting to take a look at all the issues and questions that have been raised and how so little has been responded to. And so here we are now at the point, at the end of the first phase of 10-1, an opportunity to take a look at the budget that's being proposed, to take a look at what has or has not been done, and to assess or evaluate these 5 candidates and the council itself on accomplishments at this point. So what's been done under the first phase of 10-1 as far as accountability is concerned, and where do these candidates stand on that?
Do you feel if these candidates run up for re-election, the 5 that are running for re-election, how much do you expect the public to actually believe the transparency now that it's kind of worn down to a nub, really, because it has been worn so many times? And like you said, it has been lacking even from the candidates that promised it the most, which is the most disappointing. It's actually infuriating. I don't know why you haven't put a hole in the wall. I mean, as knowing as much as you know and being as patient as you are, it's really infuriating to be promised transparency, to be promised you can come to my office. These are my office hours. I've heard this stuff from campaigns left and right when I've worked on campaigns, and I cannot stand people running for elected office that promise these things and then backtrack once they get somebody that doesn't agree with them, somebody that doesn't happen to like what they say. So what? You work for the people. You work for the people, not the other way around. And I say this over and over and over so that the everyday person can finally get up off the couch and start learning your local governments.
Well, I think we have to be careful, and it's that it's very easy to divide. And this is a microcosm of what's going on in the United States. Division, division, division. If it's not Republicans against Democrats, it's socioeconomics. If it's not the West Side against the East Side,
races against each other,
it's division.
Cultures against each other.
It's what's keeping us, the citizens, not united. And that is really one of the sociological, or one of the biggest things that is preventing us from really moving and getting that oversight. And I think that that's some of the information that you're sharing with us to get us on the same page so we can be an advocate. Some of the things I was looking at, like as far as so we had, today was an interesting news cycle. Did you know that they're spending over $5 million on the police cameras? $5 million above.
Right.
And they're sticking
the
with
body
it.
cameras?
The body cameras.
Okay.
And the second vendor said, no, I could do it a lot cheaper. And Microsoft even has body cameras, and they were doing it at a cheaper price, but they're not going to do that. They're going to keep the high price. The other thing was, what else came out?
Was there a comment as to why they chose that specific one?
Because in the end, it will save them money in the long run, theoretically. They already promised the bid, and the system is already in place, but they won't revisit it. The police chief and everybody, they said, no, that this is the way it's going to be. And it just seems like a high expenditure.
It does.
You can get these little body cameras at like Best Buy for $100, to sync it up to the city, I know is a little bit hard. But I do see where you're saying some of the waste is happening.
Well, that's a good example. And I think it also illustrates, though, how this is an opportunity to raise questions about why there is this lack of accountability within the city government itself. Now, for example, we've had the auditor's office, city auditor, has come up with pretty good, tough audit results. in 2 or 3 offices recently, most recently in EMS, really in public safety. And the fact of the recruitment problems and other issues. I won't go into detail on that. Another area was in the housing department, very critical about how, and again, we haven't seen any results of the audits that came out of the auditor's office. It's another reason we have contended that we need an outside independent audit. The only one that we really had anytime recently, and I say quote unquote independent outside, was the Zucker report of last year. It cost the taxpayers $2.25 million.
Holy
And while
wow.
they came out with recommendations, findings that within the planning and development department, I believe it was, there was mismanagement, serious, and a culture of mismanagement. But what happened was nobody got fired, nobody was reprimanded. Instead, that particular division was divided into 2. Now, that's the one that is responsible for providing permits and expediting and moving ahead with all the construction that's going on in town. On the other hand, $2.5 million, you would think, or rather $250,000 rather for that, you would think that we would have a little bit more in the way of specific examples of an outcome. Well, we did. The mayor says, and the Realtors Association said, well, what we really need to deal with affordability is 10,000 new housing units each year for the next 10 years, total of 100,000. Well, of course, that makes money for the realtors. But the question is, when we use the term affordability and affordable, well, affordable for who? Is that for the people who live here or the people who are coming in from other parts of the country?
Exactly, that's what I was thinking.
And who's making the money? So that to come back to this point, when you see audits made of various kinds, whether it's internal or external, but they don't cover what we need and don't provide the information, or they give us a false sense of hope, such as the Zucker report did. We're going to divide this division into 2.
You hit the nail on the head with that one. I just had to throw that in there.
Well, by the way, that also was a particular department in which there was a grand jury 4-count indictment on a bribery charge about 3 years ago.
the
Gray
permitting.
Panthers, yes. And again, we're dealing with the question of permits being issued. The developers want permits issued quickly so they can build and make money. Well, we've been trying to find out where that stands, and nobody's been able to tell. A grand jury indictment, we have heard certain things, but there's been no response from the city on that. We've not been able to get any kind of reaction from them. One of the questions I have, though, is it's very simple. If you're indicted, you have an indictment for bribery, on bribery charges, why is it in this case you had only the bribee being indicted? What about the bribers? Were they developers, or what's the reason? In other words, you have all kinds of questions. People call it speculation if you want to, but it seems like an awful lot of stonewalling. So,
Or a fall guy.
a fall guy, right? And meanwhile, maybe the guy knows so much that they're afraid he'll talk. That should be a good reason for not pursuing it any further. But these are bribery charges, felony charges. Now, we do have a means, though, of dealing with this, and I like to remind myself and others that, you know, when you take an oath of office, and some people swear on the Bible, you know, but that is a serious matter. And under federal regulations and guidelines and requirements, that in itself, you can be held responsible and accountable for taking an oath of office. We don't use that enough, but that's one of the things we are focused on now. In requesting federal investigation, we want a federal agency, and the FBI has done much of this in recent years. They have a department, or part of the FBI. It's focused on investigating public corruption. We
From
made
elected
references-
officials.
Yes.
That is perfect.
Public official corruption.
I remember you mentioning that last show, and that's like what blew my mind. Completely blew my
Well,
mind.
I'd recommend the viewers just Google Crystal City, Texas investigation,
Oh, wow. That's
or El Paso, and what's happened recently. Half the city manager, the mayor, and half the council were indicted.
That one
Yeah.
I remember.
And so that's the kind of example of things that we're talking about. So again, this is not a threat, but our feeling is Gray Panthers and coalition neighborhoods that we work with, particularly in North Austin and others. And by the way, the North Austin Neighborhood Association, that council, It covers five major neighborhood councils, includes five neighborhood councils, and it covers two of the districts, the new districts, the 10-1 districts.
Is it one and is
It's
it District
six-
1 and
It's six and, well, it's two, Kazar and I think either Poole or Gallo. But the
7
point
and
is-
10?
Yeah. The point is, we do have names, we do have information, we do have a means now to raise questions. And there's again, the sworn oath of office. There also are the provisions of Title 18 United States Code, which apply here when it comes to the public monies. Good example. A few years ago, we were able to get in the city of Austin and Travis County something in the neighborhood of $8 million for rehabilitation, lead paint and asbestos abatement. Much of that money has been spent, gone, but it's not adequately accounted for. And this has been raised questioned in some of the city council meetings under the old regime before 10-1. Since 10-1, we've not been able to get a response. What happened to that $8 million? Now, on one of the websites I mentioned here, there was a two-part series in Toto magazine 10 years ago. No, it was 6 years ago now. Time flies. 6 years ago, Phantom Funds, Where's the Money? And it gives very specific examples of about 36, including about 36 cases, particularly in East Austin, of houses or homeowners who had their houses rehabbed, supposedly, except they really didn't get rehabbed. One of the cases that's very specific in there, and this one, because this woman went to court, won her case, the city came in and actually, instead of resolving the case in a fair way as was recommended or required by the court, the city came in on the side of the contractor and supported the contractor, basically starved her out. Her name is Alyssa Chambers, and that case is
right here.
representative of about 36 other cases. And we have hammered on the doors. I've written to every member of the city council, the mayor, and at least I think it's worth noting that about 6 months ago, one of the key aides to the mayor wrote back to me when I requested information, because I've been representing this particular case in order to make sure, it's been going on so long now, to make sure that we don't miss a step in terms of this accountability we're talking about. But the aide to the mayor did make a recommendation to the housing director that this particular case, Alyssa Chambers, should be focused on and utilized and held up as an example of what the mayor and the new city council wants to do in terms of resolving these homeowner issues and related, and particularly when it comes to lead paint. That's the whole issue in Flint, Michigan, is lead in the water. Well, we've got the same problem here. And the older housing stock in Austin, much of which was affected by lead paint, the old lead paint practices. Other specifics, and this is included in these total articles. A few years ago, when Bergstrom Air Base closed down, a number of those old buildings were brought into the city, moved in, and part of the reason for the $8 million being allocated by the Congress, Lloyd Doggett has a lot of credit for this, was because many of those old buildings needed that
Was
kind of
Bruce
treatment.
Todd the mayor at that time? I was reading this earlier today.
I think so, yeah.
And I was reading in the archives that the city manager had correspondence, and it's in the archives of the Austin Historical. The city manager and the assistant city manager were writing to Ann Richards,
Right.
George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, all of these officials throughout the United States. The city manager, and Austin has always had, I think it was 1924, the Chamber of Commerce is the one who actually advocated for a strong city manager. We were one with North Carolina and a few others.
Right.
We're the last remaining ones to have a strong city manager. But I don't think that it really falls on either of the two. Rather, I think we should focus, or I would suggest maybe we focus on some of the commissions. For instance, I was looking up one of them, and that is the permitting of taxis. That actually goes under a governing board under Section 2.1.185 of the Austin City Code under the Urban Transportation Committee. And they're the ones who permit taxis. So before it even got to council, before the mayor even said, his proposal on Uber and Lyft, and before there was any of this happening, there was a committee that was deciding on this beforehand.
Right.
There's one vacancy still open on it. The chairwoman has 20 years of legal experience, has done a lot for the community, and I think that we need to see more representation at these meetings of zoning. I think we need to see more people at these urban transportation commissions, or even trying to join some of these committees. And I think that we might make some progress there.
That's a bingo right there, joining the committees.
Well, yeah, I think joining and again, taking an active role and participating in these committees and commissions, because here again, I think what we're looking at in many ways, and really just a flashback to something we covered in one of the discussions last summer, during the Watergate period, and I happened to be with the federal government in investigation operations and others. In the time of Watergate, I had no particular key role. But I was there and had an experience and was involved in audits, investigations, inspections of the kind that gave us a pretty good view of what was really going on. We've seen some systemic changes. In my view, much of what Watergate was about, not to oversimplify it, was the move toward privatizing, of putting corporate heads in over the civil service, what had been civil service positions and leadership and regulation. And so when we began to see the corporate chieftains put in, that was part of what Watergate was about. If you remember the Saturday Night Massacre, all the things, there were limits on what federal agencies could do. We reported to the Congress, and there were limits, and the public had much more in the way of control, well, I'd say oversight anyway, at least opportunity, than what came later. Ironically, it was under the Carter administration. That was, the whistle was blown on that under Nixon, Watergate blew up and so on, but it was Jimmy Carter and President Carter, under which the civil service system basically became, reverted to the patronage system. Corporations running the government. And some people think it's overreach, when you say, well, really, when you remember this is, in a way, the definition of fascism, when the corporate sector basically makes the rules for the government sector,
Exactly.
the public sector. But that's really what we have.
Yeah.
And not to overstate that, but the point is where we are now, it seems to me, in this area in Austin, is with the boards, commissions, many of these people come out of the private sector. Most of them do, yeah. And they're the ones who are influencing decisions that are being made within the city government. And so what we have now through this 10-1 change is a lack, much less accountability on the part, even than we did before, of the city council people. At least we knew that they were all
irony.
there. Yeah.
The iron.
But now the duplication, fragmentation, overlapping, confusion that's involved. And that's why I'm so, I guess, fixed on this idea that now is the time to raise questions about the budget. Another thing that came out of Watergate, you remember what Deep Throat said? You want to find out what the problems are? Follow the money. You want to know who gave, who offered, gave, took, and so forth. Gave, got, offered, and took, follow the money. So that's where we are now. And we have all these issues and questions that we have a bureaucracy that will not be responsive to. And now we need a public that says, why not? And if you people who were just elected under 10-1 and we can't get answers from you at the time you're running for re-election, well, who's your opponent? You must have somebody who's going to run against you. And so maybe it's a matter of not voting so much for some people, but voting against them if you can't get them to do what they take the oath of office to do.
And I think that's so infuriating, especially with 10-1, because it was really a belief in a system. I know for me, even just doing some of the campaigns, I honestly really believed, wow, this is a republic democracy. For once, I believed it. And then here we are talking about these issues. How does it, from your generation to ours, how does that make, we have to oomph our own selves up, because you've been doing this for generations, for decades.
Well,
and you still run into these roadblocks.
I have to say, though, that, we, Gray Panthers, for example, we supported, we went along with the need for the change. And I had one time I served on the Charter Revision Commission back around 2000, 2002, and so on. And we came in with a number of recommendations which didn't fly as far as changes were concerned. We never were able to change the city charter to provide a little different balance. But our feeling this time around with the 10-1 changes was, let's give it a try. At least we've got the public support. People are concerned enough about the high prices, cost of living, affordability, and so on. So again, this is the first time around. So now's not the time to lose hope or lose faith that we can make a change. It's time to dig in and say we are going to hold these people accountable. The city council members' pay is pretty good right now. And they have a number of perks, and of course the city manager and staff even better in many cases. Or in some of our agencies, you take Austin Energy, for example, supposedly a public, or ostensibly at least a public service agency. By our count anyway, there are at least...
I was late for 2 minutes. I was locked out of the meeting.
Right. Well, again, they operate pretty much the way they want to. You've got over 100 individuals, executives who are paid anyway, whether they earn it or not, but they're paid over $100,000 per year.
I like that.
100 individuals. But on the other hand, they have the power to cut your lights off, or cut your water off. And if you don't believe that, just try it.
Or overcharged, right?
Or overcharged, which
I
is
won't
the
be
case.
trying it.
You look at the funny meters, the people people have had problems with. The billing system. I don't know whether that's still fixed, but there have been many, many instances and examples that have come to us, But here again, when you don't have the public pressure on to do anything, you're not going to see much in the way of change. So that's our first opportunity now. The other thing I'd point out is that I mentioned the Charter Revision Commission. A few years back, when we were looking at it, was, I guess, 2002 or 2001. But under a former mayor who's now a senator, say Texas State Senator, we had created what was called the Equity Commission, Austin Equity Commission. And it came into being largely as a result of the pressure that was being brought on the city and city government by the equal wage people, or I guess it was working wage, whatever it was. Anyway, the mayor says, well, I need to do something, so he creates a commission, called it the Equity Commission. Well, it worked fine at first. It looked as though it was going pretty well. Yes.
Sounds great.
Equity, beautiful.
That sounds great.
But then they selected a former Secretary of Labor, Ray Marshall, to chair that commission.
Yeah, from UT.
From UT. And we worked together, Gray Panthers worked with him and so on. But it didn't quite come out the way the mayor had thought it would. And basically because what Ray Marshall and the Equity Commission said was, you need to take a look, or we need to take a look at this overall system, the structure itself, fragmentation, duplication, overlap. Do a tough financial audit in it, find out where the bodies are buried, clean it up, flush the system, and then go from there. That never happened.
I don't think that's happened since the 1800s.
Well, no. Well, again, but what's beginning to happen now, when you see people losing their homes, and when you see people who are working 2 or 3 jobs and still can't make it, can't survive, and nothing's being done. So really, I think the bites come now, and people have to be motivated. I think what we're finding is it's not so much necessarily that people don't care or that they're giving up, but they're not quite sure what to do.
Yeah, exactly. Or what to say.
Yeah, or what to say.
What to believe.
Yeah, well, because you've got the propaganda out there.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, nobody's got all the answers. Certainly I don't, and we don't, these coalitions, but we do think we're asking the right questions. Again, accountability is a question.
Well, it's interesting. They bring in all of these corporations, right? And they give them tax breaks. And they say, okay, well, we're building jobs. But at the same time as they're doing that, they're getting tax breaks, but they're multinational corporations.
Right.
They have no allegiance to the United States. They have no allegiance to the community. They have no allegiance to the state. As a matter of fact, they get the tax breaks, and then they put their taxes offshore in a different country.
Right.
Of course.
On those taxes are supposed to go for infrastructure and roads and education. And so as they're doing this, the citizens are getting that's where the disparity is coming in, is because you're having wealthy on top CEOs at IBM, and then you're having very low wage workers. And then they say, well, we need a living wage. But all they're going to do is inflate it. They're not giving the skill set. If they would give the skill set for an individual to make a living wage, things wouldn't get inflated. Because if you just inflate the wages, then everything else is just going to go up.
Right.
And as far as affordable housing, what gets me really mad, I mean, not everybody should deserve affordable housing. I think teachers, above all, should get affordable housing. They should have first priority. A teacher starting out makes $34,000 in Texas. They can't live in Austin. They'll be commuting. And how are you going to be able to be part of the community, a part of that school, a part of the parents, if you're 2 hours away or an hour and a half away? You can't really make that connection. So if they're going to do affordable housing, I say that they should do it for first responders. They should do it for teachers, and for people who are really working in the community.
Not
I
bureaucrats.
think that the corporations they can keep their tax breaks, but I think that they should be paying for it, not the taxpayers. They need to come up with a different way of raising revenue than increasing taxes and then saying, oh, now we're going to decrease them, or no, we're going to give you some exemptions. What?
Hollow promises.
That's like 80 years old. That's
Yeah.
the same template they've been saying to us forever. I mean, I thought we were innovative. I thought we were supposed to come up with new ways. I mean, we should have self-sustainability models by now. We should have somebody somewhere who has come up with something that is more than we're going to tax your property to death, or, I mean, there has to be a new way forward.
Yeah. Well, again, this is where I think that your point, again, is well taken, as far as there have to be a number of measures taken to deal with the system itself. You can't just piecemeal. And it's one of the major thrusts of that Marshall report, the Equity Commission report, was that you have to take a look at the system here in Central Texas, take a look at the reasons, including lack of education, the other elements that have an adverse impact on all these things. But take a look. Bottom line, and I think it'd be worthwhile for viewers to go back and take a look at that. It's online, the Austin Equity Commission study, because it was never implemented. Instead, what we have seen is exactly what you mentioned, which is the increasing corporatization, privatization, and the rest of it. But the other thing that's important about Ray Marshall is that he was really, he likes to call himself the father of the Humphrey Hawkins Full Employment and Balanced Growth Act when he was Secretary of Labor back there. And so much of that has been built into that kind of influence and an approach built into looking at these local problems. So what we like to feel, Gray Panthers and these other organizations, is that while we don't have all the answers, at least we're at the point now of having public support to ask the right questions. 10-1 system, the earlier system wasn't working. The 10-1 system isn't working as it should. Now we think we have what Ray Marshall said we would need to begin to make some real change, to be able to help generate the necessary amount of public concerns, even outrage, to bring about change. It's only going to come about through, but here again, it's a matter of waking an aroused public that's willing to go to the polls. And when we have the opportunity we have now to make a change, if the people in office aren't doing what we need to do, remove them, get somebody who will. And that's one fundamental change, though, that was made under 10-1 that's very important, and that is recall.
Exactly.
We can't recall these people. Yeah.
We elected you in, we can elect you back out. Recall you back out.
And I have to smile a little bit when I remember when we had this debate a few weeks ago about the open evaluation of the city manager. One of the people on the city council, I won't call any names, but she said, well, if we go that route, city council member, it might even result in some of us being recalled.
As it should be, if the same mistakes are being made.
But isn't that revealing? My question is, well, then what do you have to hide?
Exactly.
But again, this is where we need follow-up by the public.
If they're scared and they're trying to get their scraps, what about the rest of us?
Exactly. If these are our representatives, what the hell are we supposed to think?
If they're worried about their positions, then we have no chance as a citizen.
They're supposed to be our chief, and they're worried. Well,
I got
where
to
does that leave
interview
the rest
Ray
of
Marshall when I was an undergrad at UT.
Right.
And it was one of the most enlightening conversations I've had.
Great man.
It was interesting.
He grew up as a Mississippi sharecropper and he's had a tough time making it, but he can talk to anybody. And
Yeah.
he's right down to earth. Yeah, great.
Loves the hill country.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing I'd mention too, though, is that again, we have a very important opportunity. Fred Lewis, a local attorney, is chairing. It's a group called Managing Austin, Texas Better. You can go online, take a look at that. He has a petition out to help, and he's asking people right now to get in touch with your city council person and make sure he's looking concerned about lobbyists and their impact, but he also, this other part of it has been to focus on getting the city council people to do the right thing about making public evaluation of the city manager and telling us what the verdict is. And certainly it goes back to the point here that if you have nothing to hide, then why can't you provide the information, especially when
Exactly.
you say you're going to be transparent?
You so read my mind. I was just thinking, why so much secrecy if everybody banked on transparency? I'm so sick of hearing that word. It's ridiculous.
Well, I would say this, that there's another very important element here. We're talking about issues and questions that have been raised which have to do with fraud, waste, and abuse. They're fundamentally, and when we talk about bribery, for example, a 4-count bribery grand jury bribery indictment, or we're talking about issues and questions which have gone before and been acted on by a judge, and then the city people, officials, actually stonewall and starve this successful litigant out. And she's still, by the way, fighting this battle. It's a terrible situation. And ironically, there's been a more recent case of a woman in Heritage Heights who finally was, quote, given, unquote, her house after a long battle with the city, who had very much the same kind of record of history of dealing with the city that Alyssa Chambers has. Well, she's finally been granted her house, although I understand that there's certain provisions there that prevent her from selling it. So the question is, what happens now? On the other hand, you have the other family, Alyssa Chambers, one black, one white, selective treatment, whether you want to call it discrimination or whatever it is. My point is we're dealing not only with a matter of civil rights, but civil liberties as well. So when we lump all these things together and we talk about responsive or unresponsive government and lack of accountability, and then when we roll all these things out to the public, they're out there in documents, they're out there in published form, we've got to find a way to help people, and maybe it's hard times that'll have to cause it. But to find people to get desperate enough that they will, or at least concerned enough that to take action.
Near rock
So
bottom.
our first, again, the point is our first opportunity is right now. We have an election coming up, a local election in which we can make a difference. Whatever happens nationally, but locally there is an opportunity to make a difference, and we have a record. Final point I'll make on this accountability. Don Zimmerman is Councilmember Don Zimmerman, who is chair of the Public Safety Committee. Has responded to me a number of times here recently asking what more he could do. He even sent a representative of his office out to take a look at this Chambers home, which she's about to lose, by the way, because she has held on to it as long as she could. She's very ill, lead poisoning. Her son, who was 3 years old at the time when all this went down at first, had health problems and so on. But at least Don Zimmerman has shown an interest in trying to do something. And the question is, to what extent will he be able to follow through at this point now? Mm-hmm. I did notice today in today's Austin Monitor, where the city council people are being evaluated, the members are being evaluated now. And at least he seems to be doing a few right things. At least his people in his district seem to support him, 51%.
Yes. District 6 in and of itself is completely different than the rest of the districts.
Well, and in addition to that, public safety, when we're talking about lead poisoning, that's a part of the public safety issue. And it's costing lives, it's costing money. You look at the crime situation, mentally retarded people or those who are adversely affected by lead poisoning have many, many problems. It's a nationwide problem now. So here again, this is why Gray Panthers are concerned about that. Lead in the water in Flint, Michigan and other places, lead paint in the houses here. And many of these old houses in East Austin that are being rehabbed, people may not realize it at this point, but the so-called, what used to be called the people who were moving in here at the time, Ms. Chambers was, They were one of the urban pioneers, as they were called, moving into the jungle back in the East Austin. Well, many of those people can be affected by lead paint too. You rehab these old houses. This is why the $8 million that was allocated for lead and asbestos abatement still is a problem that needs to be pursued, and that's a live one right there. So when I say we're talking about possible felonies, that's an issue right there. Federal funds. What happened to the federal funds? Now, if that doesn't bring the FBI in, I don't know what would.
And I think that by you saying that elected officials can be indicted, that's what was really amazing to me last time around. It's like when you broke it down that elected officials can literally get indicted,
Of course.
legally
Of course,
indicted
no question
for
about it.
coming back on
Negligence.
on
Yeah.
campaign promises. And yes, negligence.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, failure on campaign promises, but also actual criminal activity, actions, and over and beyond that, where they're required, federal officials are required, when they are apprised of a felony having been committed, they're obligated to take action.
Well, with 3 minutes left, this has surely been interesting. Do you want to do this again next week? I kind of like to have these youngsters on here with you.
Well, sure. I'm in my second childhood, and I'll be available. Of course,
You have a lot of
if I
info.
can walk.
And I was wanting to at least briefly mention something about Donna Dukes, but that's a whole nother thing. You brought up so many issues.
He needs to have a two-parter. He needs that two-parter.
Is that all right with you? We'll put it on an ink because, like I told you, I had Margaret Moore scheduled.
Right.
But, the Travis County Democrat candidate for DA, and she's got issues or something.
Well, aside from
What's
that,
the college scheduling.
Aside from
topic?
that, I believe that Mr. Smith has been an amazing, a really great guest each time that we've had him on, and he's given us information that not only that we didn't have prior to having him on,
Well-
but it does light that fire under the younger generations.
I would hope
Whether it's for me
Yeah.
a furious fire, or for Mr. Dominguez, correct?
Yes.
Whether it's a calmer fire for him. In any case,
He's been pretty active for a lot.
no, but I get hot though. When I'm hot, I'm hot.
And calm down there, man.
No, but I mean,
Get that right.
it takes people
I
to be
understand.
angry enough to light those fire under other people who are, maybe, I don't know. But if you do it, then yeah, sure, I'll go. I'm one of those, like, I'm bringing you with me.
Right.
Well, we don't have a lot of resources, I guess you could say. How do you get people involved? That's what I've always. Why aren't we up in arms?
You
with
have
this
to
kind
make
of
them
stuff?
care. You have to make
Well,
it, you have to
2%.
hit them in the face with why it's important
Yeah.
to them specifically.
No, only 1 minute left.
Well,
That's cut us off here. Gavino should be back, and I know he's really familiar with this. If they do, we might grow a little bit because I don't know if Mike Lee will be back or not. But I know this is an issue that Gavino. He's pretty much
sure.
into all this.
Right.
We could just do the same thing.
Well, fine.
You need to get a staff, put all this together in one spot so we can go on this fancy computer and just pull it all up.
That's possible. We have an awful lot of it already well documented in computers.
Your emails
And
are
you
just, I couldn't figure them all out because I
And you
can't
guys do
comprehend that
have,
much
you
at one
guys do
time.
have your resources, but I still have mine from,
Oh, 30 seconds.
still have mine.
We could write a book. Believe me.
You
Surely
alone
could.
could write a book.
We could write
And
a
with this 10-1, I was always thinking we're going to have to let it. It's going to take a couple of years to work its way out.
Well, it will unless we can hit hard right now on accountability by simply letting these candidates for office know what we expect.
Well, the
Now,
best way to do that is be there Thursday, I guess.
And it is kind of
Good.
like we have to morph that a little bit. We have
Right.
to
Or
adulterate
even before Thursday, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, all right. Anyway, we'll see you next week, folks.
Thank you for
Appreciate
joining us.
Joining in, and there's plenty to do out there. Stay safe, and bye-bye.
Visit the websites.